Hi, I'm Jim Russell and part of the Anderson family here in central Iowa at the moment. And my career, they wanted to talk a little bit about that. It spans some 50 years in electronics, and it started at Collins Radio in Cedar Rapids in 1966 actually, and went from there to a number of other things. But I have had the pleasure of working on the last end of the lunar module program for Apollo. I have worked on the keyless entry for Ford Motor Company. The keypads are on the door. Did the first microwave oven controller for Amana radar range out of the Amana colonies. Done all kinds of stuff in the automotive industry. Did the garage door opener for Genie garage door openers, the digital version of that. More recently, a lot of stuff for the military, stuff everywhere from undersea submarines to ground vehicles to airplanes to low Earth orbit spacecraft. So very varied career, but the story I wanted to talk about today happened at Collins Radio probably in 1969. This was the height of the Vietnam War era, and one of the things that was going on, there were a lot of fighter planes flying in that theater, and the Air Force tanker of choice at that point was the KC-135, which the Boeing 707 is a derivative of that aircraft. The C-135 came first, the tanker version is the KC-135. And so these airplanes were just completely loaded with fuel, as much as they could get on the airplane to still have it take off. So the problem with that is that it was very, very critical for what they call angle of attack. That's when the airplane is flying and it starts to take off, it's the angle it has going up into the air. It was a very critical angle for that airplane to get it off the ground. And at the time, Collins got a contract to build what was called a flight director, which is an autopilot for takeoff. And the Air Force was losing about one of those tankers a month due to crashes, due to pilots not being able to quite get that angle correct. And that was bad enough to lose the airplane, but normally the crew perished in the fire that resulted from the crash. So not only a loss of an aircraft, it was a loss of a crew, which of course was much more important. So Collins had a crash program to put this stuff on the KC-135s, all 150 or so aircraft. And there was a pretty good bonus clause in it if they got it done on time, and a pretty good penalty clause if they didn't complete it not too long after that. So we're down to the last airplane to get done and certified for the Air Force, and they could not get it to work because the airplane, when it would take off, would cant to one side, and therefore it was very close to dragging the tip of the wing on the ground, which obviously would have been catastrophic, but it didn't pass the flight qualifications. And so Collins has this one aircraft to get done. They're close to losing their incentive on the contract and going into a penalty phase, which would cost them all the profit on the contract. So very, very important for the Air Force to get it done, for the ground crews to get this aircraft flying, and for the company for financial reasons. So they couldn't figure out what was going on. None of the engineers working on the project could figure it out. So they pulled as many engineers in Collins in Cedar Rapids as they could. There were about 850 engineers in the plant at that time. I don't know how many were on this project, but the ones that were pulled said, drop everything you're doing and go do this particular task. And another gentleman and I were given the task of going through a stack of Boeing wiring diagrams. If you can imagine anything boring than looking at the aircraft wiring for a KC-135, that was about it. And we had a stack of drawings literally about 6 feet tall. And the task was find something, because nobody had any idea what was going on. So we were doing that, and it turns out another group was working on the maintenance records for this particular airframe. What they found, which was the ultimate cause of this, was that airplane had been involved in a ground accident, taxi accident, some years earlier, and because it's very similar to a 707, in the repair process, instead of putting the right wing on the aircraft, the correct wing, they put on a wing from a 707. That wing was approximately 18 inches shorter, and so it had a different lift characteristic than a wing with a longer length. And the flight director was not programmed for any kind of differential. It assumed that both wings were identical and set the ailerons to exactly the same position to control the angle of attack. When they did that, with one wing being shorter, the longer wing would go up and the shorter wing would go down. So that was the reason for it. It ultimately turned out to be a problem with the Air Force and the repair job they had done on the aircraft. And so Collins was relieved of responsibility. They finished the contract, got the money, and happy ending to that story, I guess, except for the guy that had to go back and change the wing still in that aircraft. That's the end of the story.